Right, shall we crack on? I'm Amanda Jacks, I'm a caseworker for the Football Supporters Federation. Thank you for coming along to this session about safety advisory groups, or SAGs as they're commonly known. Aside from being responsible for issuing the safety certificates, the SAGs meet throughout the season, with the meetings being attended by all key stakeholders, aside from, ironically, supporters themselves, with one or two rare exceptions. SAGs are involved in decisions about ticket allocations, kick-off times and matchday logistics. Given that we're the game's largest stakeholder, it's frustrating that we are talked about and around and yet denied a meaningful input. In short, we're still mostly seen as part of the problem and not the solution. I'm sure Dale will speak about the resistance he faces while carrying out his role for MUST. I'm going to introduce our panel. They're going to speak for a few minutes about what they do, and then we're going to take questions from the floor. But what I'd like to come out of this session is ideas about how we can break down these barriers that really shouldn't exist in 2014. Immediately to my left is Dale Haslam, who is a Man United fan. He represents the Man United Supporters Trust and a group called Reds Away. Next to him is Ruth Shaw, Chief Executive of the Sports Ground Safety Authority. And next to Ruth on the end is Dave Tomlinson, who not only is a supporter liaison officer for Crewe Alexandra, but also he is one of the very rare supporters that actually does get to sit on his safety advisory group. So, ladies first, Ruth, I'll kick off with you.
Thank you. As the session's entitled Who Are You?, I thought I'd better maybe tell you who I am. I'm the Chief Executive of the Sports Ground Safety Authority, which used to be known as the Football Licensing Authority. And it was set up by government after the Hillsborough disaster to try and make sure that nothing like that would ever happen again. So for the past 25 years, we've played a critical role helping to transform spectator safety. We work with clubs, with local authorities, and others to try and make sure the standards are as you spectators would like when you go to the grounds in terms of safety, security and comfort. And we're also very focused on making sure stadia are accessible for all supporters, so we write a guidance document around accessible stadia too. And one of the best things about my job, apart from the fact that 1 week I can be at Old Trafford meeting Diego Maradona and the next meeting Dale Haslam, the best thing is I have this magic card that gives me power of entry into any football ground at which a designated game is being played. And that sounds like a real perk, which I obviously don't abuse, but it does just underline how important safety is, and those powers are given to my inspecting team and to me because we really just want to make sure that nothing that puts life or can limit risk is happening. I'll say just a little bit about safety regime so you can understand where the Safety Advisory Group fits into that, but I won't say too much, but I'm happy to answer questions. Basically, there is safety certification legislation in place which has been around since the 1970s. And what that says is at any club, the ground is responsible for the safety of spectators at any time. So if you're a Shrewsbury Town fan, they're responsible for your safety when you're in that ground. And the local authority would issue them with a safety certificate, which is their means of controlling that. So the safety certificate might have conditions like how many people you can have as a safe capacity, how many stewards you need to operate a game, those kind of conditions. And the ground is responsible for complying, and the local authority has certain powers it can exercise. At an extreme level, if it feels the reasonable safety of spectators is completely compromised, it can issue a notice that says the game cannot go ahead. So kind of prohibition notice extreme. And one of the things that the local authority will do is run a safety advisory group to give it advice on how it discharges its duty. And that safety advisory group came out of the Hillsborough report and the Taylor recommendations. And he really found that what had happened at Hillsborough was there was a group advising the local authority, but they were not effective, they didn't meet regularly, they didn't keep records of what they were talking about, and they didn't carry out thorough inspections either. So he had a recommendation in his report that said the local authority should set up a safety advisory group with appropriate members in it, including its own staff, people like the police, the ambulance and emergency services, fire authorities. And he also said that our body as a National Inspectorate, which was set up after Hillsborough, might attend as observers, and that it should consult with relevant groups such as supporter groups. So he proposed an advisory group to give advice to the local authority, doesn't have any statutory powers. It isn't a decision-making body. It just gives advice to the local authority who issue that safety certificate and who can take the decisions. But certainly what Hillsborough said to him was this needs to be effective, efficient, well run, with all the right people in the room to make sensible safety decisions, and with good consultation with those other interested parties like spectator groups. So my inspectors attend safety advisory groups as observers, and what we try and do is bring that national picture. So we have 9 inspectors, we're across the country, regularly attending safety advisory groups at those 94 grounds that we regulate, and we try and pull that information back into the centre. So that's sort of who I am and what our role around safety advisory groups by way of introduction.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Dale.
Is that okay, everyone in the back?
I was just going to say there are a couple of seats on the front if anyone wants to move forward.
Okay, as Amanda said, I'm Dale Haslam from the Manchester United Supporters Trust. My particular role on the committee at MUST is to do with away fans ticketing and safety issues. I first got involved as a fan probably about 7 or 8 years ago, when just because it was easy for me and my friends to sort of plan away games, like when we'd go to which pub, etc., and how we were going to get there. We just created a website where anyone could go to it and see, what the arrangements were, and it kind of grew from there and ended up being a general kind of travel guide for away fans for everyone really. And in doing that, what I kind of began to see was the fact that when we play away games, we sometimes get reductions, and the way those reductions were determined was sort of noticed it wasn't a cut and dry thing, that fans weren't always involved, that it was hard for fan representatives to find out what the procedure was for how it was decided that a given game would be an away team having an allocation reduction. So over the years I've sort of looked into the system, and safety advisory groups are a big part of that. In the last few years I've tried to look into SAGs and see how they can, being looked into by fans using things like freedom of information requests, just getting in touch with them and getting in touch with people who are supposed to scrutinise them. And it's interesting really that obviously with Manchester United we tend to have a lot of scrutiny applied to us in terms of the way our away fans can behave at away games. We do probably have more ticket reductions than any other team. So a lot of the things that we're talking about today apply to United a lot more than other clubs. But I do believe that fans representatives of all clubs can learn a lot from utilising the decision-making process towards SAGs. And I hope that, if it's representative and relevant to your clubs today, that we can answer your questions, to see if there's any challenges that you want to make against those SAGs.
What Dale's done, what he didn't mention, for the last 2 seasons is compile a comprehensive report, sort of like post-match investigative work as to the policing and the stewarding and any feedback that's gone in. And some clubs and police forces and local authorities have been very open and provided all the information, and quite a few have been quite obstructive, haven't they, as who are you wanting to know this information? And there's 1 or 2 local authorities that stand out as being completely difficult. I think Newham was one, wasn't it? So if that Dale can probably give you the website address to find that report at the end, but I do strongly suggest that you have a look at it, because as I said, it's incredibly comprehensive and thorough, and it also gives you a really valuable insight into the sort of information that's been circulated about fan behaviour and how that information is used. Last but definitely not least, Dave Tomlinson.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Dave Tomlinson. I'm, first of all, an NC member here for the FSF. One of the main things that will come out, I've got lots of hats, but I'm actually a train driver for Arriva Trains Wales. So I've got loads of hats. I don't spend any time at home because I'm also a supporters liaison officer at Crewe Alex. And to do with this session, I'm also on the safety advisory group at Crewe Alex. I think the main thing to start with is I'm a supporter. I buy my own season ticket even though I am the supporters liaison officer. I sit with the fans. I've been a fan now since I was goodness knows what age. And I'd like to think that, when I go into a ground, whether it be here, and Crewe were lucky enough to be here a couple of years ago, I can look at it from a fan's point of view and not as a, a person in authority, whether it be in the football authorities or in a club. The one thing that's come about is my learning curve. It still is to this day. It's going straight up in the air. On the safety advisory groups, the first day I sat down there, you've got people from Roots Association, you've got people from the football club, the ambulance service, the fire brigade, the police there, and I'm just standing there with my mouth open going, what have I walked into here? I've just looked at some documents that Ruth's got on the table here. I think the one there is the Football Spectators Act 1989. The amount of times that I've been given these papers, go home and read them, I'm learning so much that football fans just take for granted when they go into a ground. The big manual that really I had to get my head around at Crewe, and I think anybody that comes from the fans organisation and goes on to the SAG group, is the operations manual. And as a supporter, we probably don't understand fully what an operations manual is and what it is to pull it all together. The good thing that I'm able to do as a supporter on the SAGS group, taking away everything else, whether it be my FSF role, whether it be my SLO role, is that I can sit there as a fan and not take to task, I think that's probably too strong a word, but I can question each agency and I can put a supporter's view into each agency. And I really do think, now I've been in the role for 12 months and been on the SAG for 12 months, that it's imperative somehow that we can get more supporters on SAG groups, because to start with, it's got to be a case of how many clubs, SAG groups, are getting the information out to their own fans in a proper way. At the end of the day, we can all sit there, the club are putting something on the website again, forcing it in your face. It's the way it's put across and who's putting it across as well, and I think it's very, very important that if a supporter is on that SAG group, he can be going into the clubs after the game, going into the bars, travelling with the fans, sitting with the fans. They can be questioning certain things, maybe, and I've got no experience in what you've been going through in relation to how many tickets you're getting for away games, but there are sometimes very good reasons why things have happened, but we as supporters are not told the full reasons why it's happened. So I'd like to think that, number one, as a fan, I can put into and question the agencies in the SAG, but what I'd like to be able to do as well, and I think I need to do it better, but I think every club needs to do it, is take the information back out and explain it in a proper way to the fans. And I don't think that's being done at all. And I suppose taking it on from that, the one thing that when I first walked in, there's actually two supporters representatives, if you like, on the Crewe SAG. There's a gentleman that's about 67, 68. He's not affiliated to any supporters groups. He doesn't report to anybody. He's just a supporter, which is great, but actually he doesn't report to anybody, and from what I've been told, he doesn't question very often. So I think it's very important that the supporter who is on the SAG is vocal and actually stands up for the supporters' rights in that group. But I think also, and I know this for a fact, you've also got to be willing to learn as well. And because at the end of the day, sometimes it's best to know the answer before you ask a question. And to do that on a SAG, you've got to read some unbelievably long documents. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bob.
Just to pick up on the point that Dave mentioned now, what is the mechanism for getting a supporter representative onto the SAG? Okay. So just to pick up on your last point, on the point you've been making, Dave, what is the actual mechanism for getting a supporter onto a SAG?
At Crewe, it seemed to be quite an easy. Well, I think a lot of things seem to be a lot easier at Crewe than many other clubs. Speaking to people just today, to be fair, I just showed interest in many different aspects, and they were very open. I mean, the first thing I did is, when I got the role on the NC with the Football Supporters Federation, I asked to go in the ticket office and said, can I spend a day in the ticket office and just learn a little bit about what's going on in the ticket office? And then I said, can I go and spend the day with the safety officer at a match? And then that led on to and they came to me and said, actually, we'd like you to go on to the Supporters Advisory Group. But Ruth may know a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a rule or procedure around it. The recommendation that we make in our guidance is that it's up to the local authority to decide who sits on that safety advisory group. So they chair it and they invite the people that they think they need to inform their decisions or to advise them. What we also say in our guidance, though, is that we do encourage local authorities to consult representatives of supporter groups, however they decide to do that, whether it's as a full member, observer, or through other means. But we recognise it's quite hard as well to know, if you're the local authority, who is that representative, because I think it sounds like it works very well at Crewe with yourself, but some people can only represent their own interests, some people speak on behalf of an organised group, sometimes there's more than one organised group, there may be a group for disabled supporters or non-disabled supporters. So our advice is local authority decision. We encourage them to consult with supporters and representative groups, but ultimately it's up to them whether they have somebody on the SAG or not. But what I'm thinking, hearing what you've had to say, is we can certainly put an article in our newsletter that goes around to the local authorities, explaining what has happened at Crewe and why that seemed to be effective, and that might help just to push the message out. But Dale, you might want to say something about, kind of how you might approach getting onto a Man United safety advisory group, for example.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that while home fans do have some issues that are relevant to SAG, in the main it's for away fans, and Ruth's hinted at the point that if we're only playing at, for example, Spurs once a season, then there's no point in me going, to one meeting or going to 19 meetings or however many meetings when we're only interested to our intents for one game. Whereas if, for example, keeping Tottenham alive, that example alive, if a Tottenham fans rep went to that game, then the perception would be that they'd be only interested in home issues and that away issues wouldn't get. So one of the problems, in my experience, and certainly I can only talk at Premier League level, is that SAGs and local councils are by and large very reluctant to have fans. They should, because the guidance says they should, but they just won't. They don't like that level of outside interference. I mean, Ruth and I, for the last couple of years, we tried to influence one sort of association of SAGs to move that way forward. And initially they said, we think the idea is good, but ultimately what it came down to is that they were worried that we wouldn't keep things confidential at meetings, or that we would effectively not keep to speaking when spoken to, that we would turn meetings into a row, and it died a death. I'd love for that to be rekindled, but it's an uphill struggle. One positive, and again coming back to Tottenham, is that their local council at Haringey have actually given permission for a Tottenham rep to join the SAG because of recent constructive dialogue about an issue regarding a United game. So what we hope is that if good things come from that, it will set a good example just to stay the Crewe, and that the more positive examples you get, the more it seems to be best practice, and that councils sort of drop the guard down a little bit and don't fear us and see that they can work with us. So in short, it's a bureaucracy issue in my view, but I'm hoping that over the long term it will fall away and we will get SAG reps.
Thank you, Dale.
The reason why I was so interested in what Dave had to say about it was that it seems to me such an obvious one-to-one correlation rationale for a SAG to have the SLO as the supporter representative on its body in the SAG. And perhaps that's something that Ruth could think about in terms of issuing any advice to local authorities.
Just one thing on what Dale said there about some of the thing. One of the first meetings, the first meeting I went to, the police were very concerned that a supporter was on a SAG, and they made a point and wanted it minuted that there will be certain discussions that are had within the SAG that can't go outside this room, and we had to go through this very interesting half-hour conversation, shall we say, where I'm standing there and being backed by pretty much everyone else around the table. And I know the police guys as well who were having the conversation, to say, look, if you're saying to me, I can't discuss it outside this room, then I won't discuss it outside this room. But they wanted it minuting. So it's probably come across it was dead easy to do. Yes, it was, but there are the odd thing that it isn't that easy sometimes.
Okay, thank you. There's been some hands up, so from front to back, Martin, followed by Dave, followed by Ian, followed by gentleman at the back whose name escapes me. Sorry, Martin.
Thanks, Amanda. I wanted to pick up on more or less the same point that Bob was making. I'm sure that Ruth said in the introduction there that it was in the Taylor report that safety advisory groups should consult with supporter groups. And your advice to to safety advisory groups is that they should listen to supporter groups as well. If that's so, I'd like you to reiterate that to most SAGs if you could throughout the country. That'd be nice.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think the newsletter is a good idea because we can make the point again. So what Taylor said was the advisory group should consult representatives of the club and of a recognised supporters organisation on a regular basis. So he wasn't spelling out how, but just that it was an important thing to do. And our advice says the same. And I know some clubs, I think Brighton sprang to mind as a club where the safety office has very good relationships with the supporters organisations, and they have a really different attitude, I think, to a number of clubs towards, you know, home and away fans, and they're trying to do a lot to create a great experience for fans because it also has a positive impact on safety. So there are other ways of doing it than on the SAG, but I think it's a good place to start if there are examples of it working well. And I think, you know, Dale and I have battled this year with or grappled, I should say, really, with how he can get the information he needs to support fans who are travelling and therefore help the teams the clubs that are receiving them to have a safe experience. And I feel for Dale quite often that part of the frustration must be about getting information back from his own club as well as from the teams that they're visiting. So I think it's twofold actually. The clubs should be working with their own fans and supporters groups. Safety advisory groups should try and be open and transparent to visiting teams as well, but it takes a bit of kind of working together on both sides.
Yeah, thanks for that. A little bit of an observation as well, I suppose, which might echo with some other people in the room. My SAG actually looks after 3 different stadiums in Doncaster. We've got the Doncaster Racecourse, the Keepmoat Stadium, and the local Castle Park, which is the local rugby club. In my discussions with the football club and with our stadium manager over various issues like flags and size of flags and banners and this kind of thing, we constantly came up with this excuse from the stadium manager that the SAG was stopping them from doing things. The SAG insisted on this and the SAG insisted on something else. So I made an appointment to see the SAG, and I actually sat down and spoke to these people, and it wasn't them at all. It was the stadium manager. She just liked to use the SAG as the excuse. It was a get-out clause. I still haven't been invited to sit on the SAG, I might add, but at least I do have some communication with them. But if your recommendation, then I'm going to go back to them and I'm going to not insist, but I'm going to certainly ask that we have some regular dialogue with the SAG. I think that's fair.
I'm very happy. If you want to drop me a line, I'll give you my card afterwards and I can email you with what the guidance says and so you have an informed position.
I'll do that. Thank you.
And the other thing to everyone is we're a small organisation, but we do have 9 inspectors who are based around the regions. All their contact details are up on our website, Sports Ground Safety website. And again, I'll give my card to anyone who wants it. Sometimes there is a little bit of confusion around who's said what. We'll certainly try and be transparent and helpful if we can. If you've got a question or you're not sure about a safety reason for something, local inspectors will do what they can to try and help or answer those questions, I think. So do use the website and the contact details for the inspectors in your region if you have a question.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth.
Dave Kelly behind.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I'd like to congratulate Liverpool City Council into the way they handled the investigation into the crushing of Evertonians at the recent Merseyside derby. Without pointing the finger, because that's what happens, the finger gets pointed in all directions, and it's never the police's fault or the home club's fault or the away club's fault, it's always our fault. So it was our fault we got crushed. Just think about that. It's ironic that Liverpool Football Club would blame Evertonians for being late, to turning up late at the ground. And it was their fault they got crushed for turning up late. And I think, personally, I'd applaud the actions of Liverpool City Council took, and there was an open comment there that was made with regards to SAGs have these meetings, including all stakeholders. That excludes the main stakeholder. And Liverpool City Council, in fairness, after being browbeaten into it, invited the Blue Union and Spirit of Shankly along. And unlike Dave, we're probably in the state of limbo, where we may well have our foot in the door, but we can't actually get into the door. And the chairman of the licensing committee at Liverpool City Council allows us to go in and play a full and thorough part, and then leave for exactly the same reasons that Dave spoke about. Because they were going to discuss the real issues, and they didn't want us there while they were discussing the real issues. And the reality of all that is that report's now being compiled, and it's in the public domain. And I think, in fairness to the City Council, to the Mayor himself and to the Chair of that committee, he actually thanked the Blue Union and Spirit of Shankly for their valuable input. Because unlike the professionals, the police, St John's Ambulance, and all the emergency services, they're not actually at the sharp end, they're not at the cold face. And that's what them SAGs need, to be fully open and transparent, and to involve all fans.
Just for those of you who aren't aware, I mean, Dave summed it up pretty well, so I'm sure you understand what happened. When Everton were away to Liverpool earlier last season, there was significant crowd problems immediately outside of Anfield that involved crushing. And I think while Dave pays credit to the local council, I think credit in turn needs to go to the Blue Union and Spirit of Shankly, because I think without their persistence and their efforts, unfortunately what happened wouldn't necessarily have been swept under the carpet, but it would have been all too easy to blame fans for arriving late, which is exactly what happened. And as Dave said, a very comprehensive report has been released and it is accessible online, and it was very gratifying to read one of the Liverpool local councillors saying, well done the fans for getting involved, they were able to provide us all with a unique insight. Can we just do the... Yeah. Ian at the back.
I'll shout. Question for the room, please. Is that safety advisory group in their term of licensing authority to get sometimes coming up with the police? If the police say so, and that's what we would do, because we don't want any conduct with any relationship. And there have been pros and cons to that. I think somebody who's got the dog license, which in the end is together, so the police know, get on and do it the way that we want to do it. The other thing is that sometimes the police will recommend early pick-up time, which is completely a waste of time, really. It all happens to end up at a gate spot and still they left it. So there's still the same amount of drinking time before the kick-off, whenever it's the game. And I do fear that sometimes safety advisors and the local council aren't prepared to actually say no to the police.
It's two good and very challenging questions, and without the benefit of being at every safety advisory group that takes place across the country, I can't give a kind of single view. What I do think is one of the best and most important things about safety advisory groups that work well is that they have a true partnership between all those agencies' representatives. So the best ones are ones where the right people are in the room, so the right level of seniority to present evidence and to make decisions, to have challenging conversations with each other if it's necessary, but to make informed decisions based on what they see in terms of evidence, not just instincts or suggestions. So where there's good informed police evidence, where there are good competent safety officers who know their grounds and know their fans, where there are local authorities who are taking their responsibility seriously and understand the legislation and what they can and can't do with the safety certificate, then those are the safety advisory groups that I believe work very well, and I believe are not making decisions through fear but through informed assessment of risk and with the interest of spectators at the heart of it. So there may be conversations, I think, where kind of police interests are different from club interests. I think where the partnerships work well and where there's a good mutual understanding, then the outcomes are the right ones. I can't say hand on heart that happens every time, but I hope it does, and it's what we try and encourage. Quite often we find ourselves as an honest broker or an independent person trying to present both sides of an argument. But I suspect there are times when decisions will go one way or another kick-off times is a good topical one at the moment, where perhaps decisions are being asked for on a basis of public order outside the ground, but trying to use safety certificates which are to do with safety inside the ground, and then there's a tension there as well. So it's definitely not straightforward. But most of what I see are good, robust conversations between professionals who want the same outcome for fans, which is safety at the ground and outside it.
Thank you, Ruth. Mr. Whiteshirt, then David, then Sue, please. Then
That must be in my away colours, then, eh? One for Ruth, please. Just how much of a duty of care have the clubs got? Is it from the time? Because my colleague from Crewe knows that safety from the railway starts from the time you walk out of the door to the time you go to work and then come back again. So where does the safety side, like the keep on hearing about snow-covered pavements and that sort of thing, where does eventually they say, well, I'm sorry, mate, you're homeward bound now, you're nothing to do with us? How much? The reason why I'm saying this is duty of care is because fixtures for Bristol City, because of our location, and that's hard luck, I still reckon they're very poor. I found out that the conference to hand-pick their fixtures. I wish I could hand-pick the fixtures for all the clubs, not being, selfish. I mean, say Bradford City on the home and away on a Tuesday night. It's a long way. Tuesday nights, Portvale home and away, Leyton Orient home and away. Okay, London's not too bad because you can get it back by train, and Crewe at home. I mean, to say it's not ideal, but it would be nice because we've all seen down our neck of the woods because the amount of motorways. We've seen accidents at 3:30 in the morning. What does that tell you? We're not drunk at 3:30 in the morning. We're just tired. One lorry was stopped on the hard shoulder, and another lorry went into the back of them at 3:30 in the morning. What did he do? He clipped him because with that he did, and it's that safety side of things. Is what gets up my nose is I think fixtures, or we should do better for fixtures midweek games, a lot better than what we should do. Because I know that I've spoke to Ian many times about this, and so it's alleged that the clubs want these short distances during the week and long runs at other times because of the fans' attendance. Well, I wrote to 23 liaison officers in the First Division. I got 12 replies back, and every one of them, or about two, basically said, "Ain't got a clue what you're talking about, mate." So, these decisions that we hear are being made, they're made by a couple of people. So it's just basically the safety side of things. I don't want to hear about anybody being killed in the middle of the night going into the back of a lorry. And if you have to drive back from Bradford City down to Bristol, it's over 300 miles. It's just not a good thing. So I think that from an SAG point of view, I think we should be able to do better to kind of get these fixtures a little bit closer during the midweeks.
Thank you very much.
Even if we have to hand-pick them. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, the role of the Safety Advisory Group is specifically about advising the local authority on safety of sports grounds legislation. And that legislation relates to the ground, the footprint of the ground and spectators within it. So the role of the Safety Advisory Group is not about the safety beyond the curtilage or beyond the footprint. That's not to say some of the people who are there wouldn't take those matters seriously, but I really think clubs and the leagues as well, so the Football League, the Premier League, the people who are thinking about fixtures lists at the beginning of the season should be thinking about those things. There are a few examples where you can take account of something outside the ground in relation to the safety certificate, which might be, for example, if there was very adverse weather and stewards would not be able to travel, or tube strike, or kind of snowstorm, and if stewards couldn't travel and get to the ground, then you would be able to use the safety legislation because you'd say the safety of the spectators within the ground would be compromised by that external factor. But otherwise, things like what time the last train home runs, or those kind of things you can't take into account in terms of the specific safety legislation. That's not to say that clubs and the leagues shouldn't be taking those things seriously when they're thinking about fixtures and fans' well-being. I don't know if you've had any experience of anything similar at Crewe.
I think the only thing that we came into contact with last year, which I did speak to Amanda about quite a lot, was it was at Bury, and I don't know whether we've got any Bury fans. I know there are some at the event, and it sort of like picked in because the footprint of the stadium at Bury was away from where the coaches were dropping supporters off. So the supporters were actually getting off the coach at Bury 300 yards from the ground, but then were attacked by some Bury fans walking down to the ground. And basically when questions were asked, Bury were saying, well, it's nothing to do with us because they're not on the footprint of the ground, which then brought on numerous other things about liability and people who were travelling on the coaches, and where the people who were running the coaches, the liability felt then changed into who were the stadium owners. So that's the only thing really that's come about there, but it's the footprint of the stadium which comes in, and that's on many of the SAG meetings that I've been to, and I know it's John at the back from Bristol, that's one of the things that's mentioned all the time, the footprint of the stadium all the time.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes and 3, if not 4, people left to speak. So I'm certainly not saying rush it, but just bear in mind the time left.
Okay, I'll speak very quickly.
Okay, please do. Thank you very much.
I just want to take it... Sorry, it's David from Aston Villa Supporters Trust. I want to just take the health and safety thing away from public order and look at in terms of atmosphere in grounds. I mean, at the moment, it's mainly home supporters. There's a distinct lack of atmosphere in most of the major grounds. But at the same time, there's a kind of movement, especially amongst the younger fans, who want to have more flags. They want to have more banners. They see the example of the yellow wall of Borussia Dortmund, and this is a team that's playing Champions League, European football, where there's even more kind of restrictions on match days. So I'm just thinking, I mean, health and safety is always used to kind of suffocate these kind of attempts, or it's used as an excuse to not do things. So, I mean, in Germany, they have more of a can-do mentality, while here in this country we tend to put up obstacles to not do something rather than, attempt to do something. So if you wanted to do something like the yellow wall, I mean, what would supporters have to go through to get to that stage where they could have flags? I mean, I spoke to the Spur of the Shankly, and because Liverpool's probably the best example of an English team that's fans has, a cop end of loads of flags, and they said it was essentially over the years building up a relationship with the safety manager, the stadium manager of the club. I mean, is that what every fan has to do, or fan group has to do? Or is there anybody who can actually help smooth the waters?
I mean, I don't know a lot about that in any detail, but I do know we've had examples of flags being put forward by fan groups to a club for use, and then there are things that you can do to test their fireproof, for example, or kind of won't cause trip hazards or whatever the things might be. I mean, I feel sometimes health and safety, we're victims of kind of negative press and kind of maybe sometimes using as an excuse for things. But I think the football authorities, the Football League, the Premier League, who have ground regulations about what you can and can't put in grounds, maybe they would be a good place to start, maybe working with the FSF. If there are things that fans want to bring into grounds around atmosphere, to have that conversation at the strategic level would be quite sensible, because there might be guidance that's already out there from the football leagues that means you don't have to make the case kind of 94 or more times across the country. But I don't know if
by happy coincidence, Kathy Long, who's head of supporter services of the Premier League, is waving frantically at the back. So I think she might like to answer your question, David.
I think it's a really good point. It's something that frustrates us as well, actually, sometimes, that we hear of fans not being able to take banners into some grounds, and they've been taken into every other ground and not had a problem. And then one week you turn up and you can't take it in. We've sometimes smoothed the waters with clubs, so certainly if it's a Premier League level, people can get in touch with us and we'll speak to the club and see if there's actually any decent rationale. I think certainly at our level, most fans have fire certificates for big banners and flags and can produce them when needed, so quite often you can actually get around some sort of objections, and we've certainly stepped in on a few occasions over the last season to challenge safety officers' decisions, and actually they have sort of backed down, and we've said, look, frankly, we think you've got other things to worry about on the day than whether people bringing in flags and banners, and they've been okay with it, so you can always let us know.
Very helpful. And I'm sure you wouldn't thank me for giving out your email address and phone number to all and sundry, Kathy. So if you want to come,
supporters at PremierLeague.com.
Yeah.
We'll answer it now. We'll all have a look at it. But with 20 clubs, it's not too bad for us. I sympathise with the Football League, because I think for them to try and step in at so many clubs, it can be difficult.
Yeah.
Just give it a go. You can't promise to fix it, but we think we've only got a handful of clubs that tend to be an issue anyway, so let us know.
Lovely, thank you, Kathy. And equally, Football League clubs, you can either go direct via their website or come to us, the FSF, and we can act as a conduit for you. Sue had a question, and then Peter behind Sue, and then finally Pam. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. I'm actually a supporter who sits on the south. And I must say that it's not as exciting as some people might think. Some of it is just quite mundane type stuff about the structure of the ground, whether things are safe, whether there's medical facilities in place and things like that. So it's not all sort of exciting things. A lot of the things about sort of banners in grounds, I think, sort of like down to the safety officer of the ground. And it's probably a relationship that has to be developed with the safety officer and to make sure it's fireproof and things like that. What I did want, I do realise that there are many clubs that don't have that, that are not able to have supporters on their SAGs, and this is sometimes to do with the local authorities, and sometimes to do with the police. On the one that I actually sit on, it's a case of there's a meeting and then there's a secondary meeting where if there's any sensitivities that the police want to raise or any of the fire or ambulance authorities, then they discuss it then. So I wouldn't be at that part of the meeting, but I would be at the earlier part of the meeting. What I did want to ask, though, is Ruth, is because you're linked to a government department as well about public policy, would your inspectors be able to introduce the idea and actually introduce people who may be representatives of supporters groups to the SAGs? Because, I mean, some local authorities may be open to it, but I just wondered whether you and your inspectors may be another route in.
Yeah, and I suppose I think you make a really good point at the beginning about what the SAG is there for. It is there for a lot of the mundane things that you might think about, annual inspections of grounds, check if the CCTV is working. You know, the large part is not about those things that are police tactics or ticketing decisions, because they're really for other people, they're for the club or for the police. And that role of the Safety Advisory Group, we're only there as observers as well. So we can certainly raise it. We have a list of topics to introduce at SAG meetings when our inspectors go, and SAG meetings might be between 2 and 6 times a year depending on the club. But I can certainly add to it this question about supporter liaison or representation. What we wouldn't want to do is tell a local authority how to run its business or what advice they need for their safety at sports grounds legislation. But I think the newsletter article, which I'm hoping Dave might help us write, and also kind of just raising the issue at those regular meetings, we can certainly try and encourage them to think again about how they liaise with their fans, whether it's on the group or otherwise. So yeah, I can do that.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Ruth. Peter.
Yes, Peter Lloyd, Posh Supporters Trust. It seems to me clear from the blurb around the debate here, that's the piece of verbiage around in the programme, from the confusion about the responsibilities that have been raised on the floor, and to some extent actually on the panel as well, that there is, the situation is unsatisfactory insofar as who knows who is supposed to be doing what, who is supposed to be deciding. And actually I don't think it's good enough anymore to say that the local authorities shouldn't necessarily be told what to do. I think it's time they were told what to do. But if you look at the randomness of some of the decisions, so instigating a bobble match between Chester and Wrexham both ways, which is incredibly costly for supporters to travel and disruptive. The sort of rows that broke out that Ian referred to, Sunderland, Newcastle, the issue of Hull playing an away game at Huddersfield and having a bubble situation for a match where there's been no record of any trouble before. So it's clear that certain elements in the decision-making process have got the ability to just impose it, probably mostly the police, but it could be the local authority. So is it not right, in light of all what we've heard today, what you got in the blurb, and what we all know about, which is probably many more situations which are unsatisfactory, that there should be a review of the governance, that is, the responsibilities of the different parties, and coming up with a new system which stops this random and sometimes it seems deliberate, particularly sometimes in the case of the police, just if you like, they're cross with the government, they're saying we've got no money, we're going to change the kick-off times to save ourselves some money. Why should supporters be in the middle of a row between the police and the government? So if you have better rules and a better governance system, you won't have that opportunity for that to happen.
Can I just say, I think if we haven't made it clear enough, that's probably our fault, not the rules around the Safety Advisory Group procedure. The roles and responsibilities, terms of reference for Safety Advisory Groups are really clear, and that's about doing a particular job, advising the local authority in discharge of their duties under the Safety of Sports Grounds legislation. And that's one governance arrangement, one procedure. I think some of the other things that are in the blurb and that we've touched on are different procedures, policing tactics or resources decisions, decisions between commercial elements of the club and others. So I think you make a fair point that there's some blurring around those various activities that are going on. But if I haven't made clear the role of the SAG and the link to the Safety at Sports Grounds legislation, that's probably because it is quite complex and we haven't had a lot of time. But I can do that, and we'll try to do that in terms of, I mean, Dale and I have tried to work on a fact sheet that might explain the role of the SAG, and I think that is quite clear and well structured, and I think it is for the local authorities to determine who they want to consult to discharge their duties. We can encourage them to involve supporters if we think it's a good thing. But I think on those other areas around decisions around resourcing, police decisions, etc., there maybe is less clarity, and we can take that away as a conversation.
Yeah, and there's certainly a problem with buck passing that's been highlighted here today, and there's also a problem, I think, of football can on occasion be quite introspective, and going back to what happened at Anfield with the Everton fans, without a doubt, had it not been for their persistence, the report never would have come out and the recommendations wouldn't have been made. And the onus should not really be on the supporters, who are 99% of them volunteers, to be the ones putting on that pressure. So it might not be sort of the problem of the SAG, but it certainly is an issue that I experience regularly. As I said, you know, this introspection and also a very, very defensive attitude. And I know that you meet that a lot, Dale, as well, don't you? When you're trying to resolve issues with your fans, you're told to be on your way. You know, you're just a fan, and yet what the authorities are failing to recognise is that Dale and many people like him actually want to help. They don't want to be surrounded by fans that are causing them problems, but all the time these barriers are going up, it just makes it harder and harder. And I think, just to conclude, it's a very good job. A lot of fans, volunteers are persistent, because if they weren't, they'd all be giving up and going home as well after they're not getting over the first hurdle. Sorry, it's my... I couldn't resist
I've got the microphone in my hand, so if I could just come back on your point to say your rules may be clear, but I'm saying to you it's not working. Okay, they're absolutely clear, it is not working. And the way I can demonstrate that is that whoever brought up the issue of there being a problem in the ground and somebody saying, oh, that's the Safety Advisory Group, so something you've created the, if you like, the part of the way that should be structured, and then discovering it was a stadium manager using that as a cover. So the issue of SAGs being used as a cover is in itself a very important issue to address. It is not working, there are problems, and people are using them as excuse in reality. So I don't think there's any... it's very difficult to give an answer that wouldn't say we need a review of the governance arrangements around safety and the like at football grounds, and the way decisions are made on limited ticketing, dropping fans off. The whole caboodle needs looking at, again, with clarity over responsibilities, and so people don't overstep their mark. It's not working. That's
it sounds to me like the communications around that is the key to the, you know, kind of people are giving incorrect messages.
The people are taking decisions. It's not messages or communications. It's about people hijacking the decision-making process in their own interests.
But in the example that was given, the safety officer said they could not admit a flag because the Safety Advisory Group said they couldn't, and that was just incorrect. and inaccurate. There wasn't a problem with the safety advisory group. It was a misstatement of fact from the safety officer. So
where's
that's
the sanction then for that incorrect behaviour?
Well, that's a good question.
I think also on your point, and I think I brought it up at the start, if supporters are on the SAG group, they should be putting out the information about the SAG meetings, and I think in certain circumstances like the flags that you just mentioned there, I think that is what the type of information that maybe the supporters representative, if they like, on the SAG group should be putting out. It seems as though, listening to other clubs, there isn't many supporters reps on the SAGs, so that information isn't going out at all. And I think that we need to, I don't think we're going to be able to do it by listening to not just this debate, but the meetings that I've been to before. We're not going to be able to do it tomorrow or next Thursday. It's going to take time. But I think we've all got to work together, and we've all got to keep the debate going and keep it rolling to get the ball bigger and bigger, so that people realise that this is what's needed to move it forward.
I think Pam has had her hand up before now, and then we're going to have to conclude with John. But if you've got the time, Ruth, would you be happy to have conversations?
I'm really happy to stay and speak to people afterwards. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Is it on? Hi, I'm Pam Wilkins. I'm the supporter representative from Portsmouth Safety Advisory Group. And like Dave, actually, their main concern seems to be confidentiality. And also, I've just been an observer up to now, but I'm now going to be an active part of it, because I've just discovered also, like you, that there's been somebody there for years who's been a supporter representative who's not done anything. And I do actually report back to a conference of different groups. But I just wondered, Ruth, if there's any recommendation by you that as opposed to the emergency services, but whether the council representatives should have any knowledge of football, an idea about football and football going crowds, because it seems to me that they don't on our group.
Yeah, I mean, basically what they're doing is they're enforcing the legislation of safety at sports grounds, and they're required to be competent in that, so they need to understand the legislation. They need to have the proper training and development around that. I think it's fair to say that when they have an understanding of the ground they're regulating, be it football, horse racing, something else, whatever it might be, then that's obviously going to make it, hopefully a more informed decisions they're making. But we've never suggested it's a type of competence necessary to carry out your regulatory duties. But I think it's a fair challenge that, understanding the grounds, the supporters, etc., can help make informed decisions.
Thank you. John.
John Keane. I was the supporters representative on the Reading SAG a number of years ago, and I found it immensely useful, and I think everybody else did. And if I can use one point to illustrate what I think is the biggest problem that we've got, and it was a fairly prosaic thing. An ambulance was parking outside the exits with its tail ripped down, causing a trip hazard, and individual supporters had been complaining to stewards for months about this. And it wasn't until I brought it up and mentioned it to the ambulance people that it was resolved for the next match. And I mean, I think that's just an illustration. The SAG is all very well, but I think there's a major disconnect sometimes between what the SAG say and what happens on the ground with individual stewards, and there isn't really the communications in both directions. So what happens at matches doesn't get back to the SAG if there's not a supporter, and what the SAG say doesn't always get to the stewards.
And I just reiterate the point, the SAG is there to advise the local authority on the discharge of their duties. The club is responsible for the safety of spectators. If the club is not listening to spectators who are saying this is a danger, that's the first part of the problem. And in a way we've talked about the SAG and I think that's where the confusion's come about the roles and responsibilities. The club is responsible at all times for the safety of spectators, and that's the first layer of communications that needs to be working effectively, I think.
Thank you. I'm sorry, so I'm going to have to wrap it up, but
the point that I just want to raise is about the SAG and the SLO. Because, in a sense, there's only so many SAG meetings during the year. And there may be things that arise between meetings. So the representatives on on the SAG may not necessarily be aware what's going on in the club. Now, surely it would be the